Good evening. I'm Psychiatrist Jay Fawver, live from Fort Wayne, Indiana. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Now in its 27th year, Matters of the Mind is a live call-in program where you have the chance to choose the topic for discussion. So if you have any questions concerning mental health issues, give me a call in the Fort Wayne area by dialing 969-2720, or if you're calling coast to coast, you may dial toll-free at 866-969-2720. Now, on a fairly regular basis, we are broadcasting live every Monday night from our spectacular PBS Fort Wayne studios, which lie in the shadows of the Purdue Fort Wayne campus. And if you'd like to contact me with an email question that I can answer on the air, you may write me via the internet at mattersofthemind, all one word, at wfwa.org. That's mattersofthemind at wfwa.org. And I'll start tonight's program with a question I just recently received. It reads, Dear Dr. Fawver, is it possible to inherit trauma from previous generations? My family has had a tough time for well over 100 years with poverty, prejudice, and war. Though things may seem good now, are we unconsciously transmitting trauma to our younger generations? Well, you know, the whole idea of a hereditary trauma is probably not related to hardwiring genetics based on the trauma itself, but more on the possibility of your influence of having experienced the trauma with post-traumatic stress symptoms. In other words, if you have a parent who was traumatized by war, by abuse, by weather, whatever kind of situation might have occurred to have inflicted that trauma, the parent's reaction to those kind of incidences might have an impact on you based on the parents having difficulty with rage, irritability, impatience, and so forth, because those can all be symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So it's not that you are hardwired to inherit the very same trauma they've experienced. It's more that you're hardwired to experience the impact of the trauma itself. And that's particularly impactful for you when you're under 8 years of age. So if you're under 8 years of age and you're around a parent who is emotionally abusive, who is very highly reactive due to post-traumatic stress, that can have an impact on you, and that can hardwire your brain. So it's not the actual trauma itself that's hardwiring your brain, it's the parent's reaction to that trauma. We saw that all the time over the past, 20, 30 years with Vietnam veterans who then had children. The Vietnam veterans who had children, if they had a lot of post-traumatic stress symptoms, as a parent, they would then cause the children sometimes to be anxious, and they'd be somewhat on guard and on edge. And you'd think, well, gee, it's almost like these young children who become adolescents and young adults also have the similar type of symptoms. It's that they were influenced by their parental behavior. So the parents can significantly influence a child's behavior long-term if that child is exposed to emotionally abusive, sexually abusive, physically abusive behavior, especially before the age of 8 years of age. As a young child, the front part of your brain is growing up until the age of 24, but especially before 8 years of age, that's very important. That's why we'll often use this questionnaire called the ACEs questionnaire, the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire. And the ACEs questionnaire is a scale by which we determine if somebody's experienced certain types of trauma. They determined a long time ago that certain types of trauma were more likely to impact you later on from an emotional standpoint. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, if a parent was separated or divorced, if you had a parent who had a problem with drug abuse, if you had a parent who went to jail, these are all specific type of traumas as a child. If you experience, you are more likely later on to have emotional disturbances yourself. And if you have 4 out of 10 or more of those kind of experiences, it's somewhat predictive on what antidepressants might work and what might not if you have depression. For instance, if you have over 4 of those type of experiences as a child, it's predictive that the serotonin-based antidepressants won't work so well. Now, the serotonin-based antidepressants only work really well in about 1 out of 3 people anyway, but if you've had early childhood experiences with trauma, they're even less likely to work. So some people wonder, well, gee, my friend takes Lexapro, my friend takes Zoloft. It works really well for them. Why is it not working for me? Well, a factor might be that you had different early life experiences, and that could be an influence. Thanks for your email. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Diane. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Diane, you want to know what would be the cause for a person to repeatedly talk out loud while in a different room and have a private conversation to themselves? Well, sometimes, Diane, thinking about a less pathological form of that, if somebody's talking to themselves and they're in a different room all by themselves, sometimes that's how people think. Sometimes people are more auditory learners. Now, some people like myself are more a kinesthetic learner where I like to be doing things as I learn. Some people have to hear things out loud. So they're the people that like to go to lectures and hear the words spoken. Other people are more visual learners where they like to see things written out and they like the bullet points. And they are able to learn better visually. So if a person's talking to themselves, sometimes they're just trying to learn and remember something out loud. Now that's a less pathological case. A more pathological case if somebody is speaking to themselves in terms of having a conversation with themselves, they might be hearing voices. Now that is a condition that we'd call schizophrenia or a psychotic disturbance, but a psychotic disturbance is where you will literally hear a voice inside your head or outside your head, and the voice is as clear as you'll hear mine right now. And the reason for this is there's a disturbance in the hearing part of the brain and the speaking part of the brain up front. Now, generally, you should be able to, when you think a thought, you typically think a thought in words, and that thinking of a thought in words is in the front part of the brain here. If you hear somebody talking to you, that's in the back part of the brain, in the auditory cortex. There's a band of tissue called the arcuate fasciculus that differentiates if you're thinking a thought or if you're hearing somebody talking to you. If the arcuate fasciculus is impaired, you can't tell the difference. So a thought that you're thinking becomes a voice in your head. And it sounds very, very clear. And when people are more sick with schizophrenia, they'll hear voices occurring on the outside of their heads, and they'll often talk to that voice back and forth. Do they know it's a voice outside their head? It's as clear as it is mine right now, so they will often respond to that voice. Now that's a pathological situation where somebody's speaking out loud because they're in a conversation. So that's a psychotic disturbance that generally warrants treatment because that can be impairing. You can imagine if you're trying to go through life and you hear this voice talking to you all the time, yeah, that's going to be very, very distracting. So that's something you'd want to have treated, and the treatment for it would be using an antipsychotic medication that would strengthen the transmission and the ability of the arcuate fasciculus to differentiate the thinking part of the brain to the hearing part of the brain. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, James. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. James, you've mentioned you've been on an antidepressant for a year, and it's worked well until lately. Would you need to switch or add a second medication when you're seeing a psychiatrist, and what's that process? I'll give you a definite maybe, James. I'd want to look at several different situations. Okay, the antidepressant medication you've taken for a year, had you taken it previously and had it worked well previously, that'd be a good sign. Has a family member taken that antidepressant and it worked really well for a long time? That'd be a good sign. Have you had some recent life stresses that might have caused you to have difficulties with what we call resilience? Resilience is a fancy term for just referring to your ability to put up with stuff. So if you take an antidepressant medication and it helps you this much with putting up with stuff, but then a lot of things happen. For instance, you have trouble with your spouse, you're having trouble with work relationship, your children are causing some difficulties in your life, all these things are happening, then your level of resilience sometimes will be somewhat impaired where you're not able to put up with stuff as much, and the antidepressant medication might be perceived as not working so well. If you're taking an antidepressant and it worked well for a long time, and then you start having highs where you have an underlying bipolar condition. Bipolar conditions will be where you have unnatural elevations in your mood, where you can have giddiness, and sometimes you can have even irritability, but during that time you don't need to sleep as much, you are more impulsive, you say things and do things you ordinarily wouldn't do or say. In those kind of situations, you need probably a mood stabilizer. So an antidepressant medication might work for a while, then quit working because you start having the highs come back and forth. I'd want to consider comorbid medical conditions. So if somebody has an antidepressant that's working really well and all of a sudden it seems to poop out, it might be that you have an underlying medical condition like sleep apnea, low thyroid, diabetes, low iron. These are all medical conditions that can all of a sudden make an antidepressant feel like it's not working. Another possibility for an antidepressant not working would be if you took some kind of supplement. For instance, CBD. If you all of a sudden took some CBD drops because a friend recommended them to you, you might notice that your antidepressant doesn't work as well as it did before, because CBD has a tremendous number of drug interactions. And I'll always tell people if they want to take CBD as a supplement for whatever reason, that's okay, but just don't take it with other medications because it's very likely it's going to interact with other medications and make the other medications more intolerable or even not work for that matter. So then you have the possibility of, well, okay, the antidepressant medication just pooped out. That happens commonly with these so-called serotonin antidepressant medications, Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro, Celexa, Paxil. These are medications that predominantly will increase serotonin transmission, and in doing so, they can indirectly decrease dopamine transmission. And for some people, they'll say they feel emotionally dull, they don't feel happy, they don't feel sad, they don't enjoy things, they just feel kind of blah. And in those cases, yeah, sometimes you can, on one hand, add an antidepressant medication like bupropion, which increases dopamine and norepinephrine. And then where do you determine that? Well, I'll often have people gauge how much better they're feeling on their current antidepressant. I'll ask them, 0 to 100, 0% being the antidepressant is not helping you at all, 100% is fantastic, you like how you feel. Where are you feeling on a scale of 0 to 100%? Based on how that antidepressant is doing for you. If they give me a score above 50%, I'll usually leave the antidepressant on board and add something else. Maybe another antidepressant that has a different mechanism of action. And we're commonly using low doses of the so-called antipsychotic medications that are dopamine receptor blocking agents. And in essence, they're further modulating how serotonin, norepinephrine, and norepinephrine affect your brain. Those medications include low doses of Abilify, Rexulti, Vraylar, Caplyta, a lot of different medications out there that we're using now as a means of adding on to the antidepressant to kind of season the soup, so to speak, and make them work a little bit better. And if that's all you need, that's great. Sometimes we do indeed need to change to an entirely different mechanism of action. The serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine medications we've been using for the past 70 years, sometimes they just don't give people the kind of effect they want. So in the past 5 years, we've had 2 medications come available that affect glutamate, not just norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. One of the glutamate medications is a nasal spray that people can now use by itself called Spravato. And with Spravato, you use as a nasal spray under a monitored condition in an office setting for 2 hours at a time, twice a week the first month, once a week the second month, and then it's spread out in your frequencies thereafter. But Spravato is a medication that strongly will affect glutamate transmission. Auvelity is an oral medication that will affect glutamate transmission. You can take it day by day, and it's something that works entirely differently than the so-called serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine medications. So sometimes you just have to change to an entirely different mechanism of action to try to get that kind of response. But I want to look at the whole picture there. I'd want to know, did something happen recently that kind of set you off? If something happened and you're having difficulty coping with your life circumstances, by all means, sometimes you need counseling or psychotherapy. And people will often tell me, I'm talking about medication and chemicals and all this stuff. Where does psychotherapy come in? And where does it come into play? I often will compare the use of medications to driving a car. When you're driving a car, you need an accelerator to work, you need a brake to work. The accelerator is glutamate, the brake is GABA. So you got an accelerator and brake, GABA and glutamate, that are working in this gray matter of the brain, and they're like a teeter-totter. The accelerator and the brake are balancing back and forth on the outside part of the brain. Serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine kind of give a little bit of advice to the glutamate and GABA, and they're coming from the brain stem down here, just spraying up little sprinkles of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine to tell the brain to speed up or slow down accordingly based on what it seems to need. And with that in mind, what's the role of psychotherapy? Psychotherapy is kind of like GPS. When I drive through Chicago, I've got to have my GPS on. I can't keep everything straight. I need the GPS talking to me, turn here, go here. And with GPS, it helps you navigate to your intended life goals if you don't really know where you're going at the time or you don't have life experiences. So with psychotherapy, it's like GPS, where you haven't experienced those kind of stresses before. Psychotherapy can help you kind of navigate to where you want to go and what you need to do about certain situations. Just like GPS would tell you to turn here or turn there. That's the whole role of psychotherapy, to get a professional's outside opinion based on your current circumstances, your coping mechanisms, your past life experiences. You put all that together and the psychotherapist will try to help you navigate your current situation, just like GPS helps you navigate to your intended destination. Hope that helps. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next email question. Our next email question reads, Dear Dr. Fawver, I was talking to a friend about new information regarding the clinical use of psychedelics. He called it microdosing. What can you tell me about this? Microdosing is in fact a means by which the psychedelics are being used. They're still very much in the research setting right now. There was a failed trial recently for post-traumatic stress that kind of put a lot of the research back. The psychedelics, such as psilocybin, have been discussed for the purpose of treating depression, post-traumatic stress disorder at these very, very, very tiny doses, like 1/20th the dosage that somebody might use on the street, with the intention of then being monitored over the course of several hours during that so-called psychedelic experience, with hopes that they'd get significant remission of their symptoms. The psychedelics do indeed work differently than the traditional medications. There's a lot of excitement about them. It's just that they need to be used properly. It used to be that the psychedelics were thought to need the at-the-shoulder psychotherapist available to talk somebody through the experience. Now it's simply called psychological support, where the psychotherapy is not so important as is simple support and reassurance by somebody, whether it be a psychotherapist or whomever, at the bedside of the person when they're getting the psychedelic experience. So I think we're maybe a year, 2 years out where they're being used on a regular basis, but a year or two ago I would have thought the same thing. So they've been kind of pushed back a little bit right now, but psychedelics might have a place in the future, specifically for depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Thanks for your email. Let's go to our next caller. Our next email. Our next email is, Dear Dr. Fawver, many schools in the area have started to ban cell phones during school hours for students. Have you heard any feedback about this, if it's beneficial for students' well-being? My first question is, okay, cell phones in the school setting, why would a student need a cell phone in the school setting? I understand laptops, iPads, and so forth. They are important for the education, but why is a student using a cell phone in a school setting? So I would wonder what the purpose of all that is. Way back in the day, you might remember this yourself, there was an issue concerning passing notes in school. And as we recall, when students passed notes in school, that was disruptive to the teachers presenting the lessons. So if you have a cell phone, what are you doing with a cell phone? You're texting. I think there are times where a student needs to be informed by a parent about some kind of an emergency. The student needs to contact the parent or somebody for an emergency purpose, but that can be done through the administrator within the school itself. But I'm not hearing a real good reason for students to have cell phones on them in the classroom unless they're being used in some type of way for education. But again, that's often used for iPads or for tablets. I've not heard one way or another about the mental health benefits of prohibiting cell phones with students in schools, but I think the answer would be obvious. I don't think there's a lot of good reasons for students to have cell phones in the school setting itself. Thanks for your email. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Robert. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Robert, you want to know, does magnesium help with sleep or depression or anxiety? Robert, magnesium is an essential two-charge cation. It's in the same category on the chemical chart as is calcium. So magnesium can help with a lot of people for sleep. I often recommend magnesium citrate. It gets a little bit better absorbed for a lot of people. But magnesium citrate is important for helping with sleep. For some people, it does help with anxiety. For some people, it helps with depression, especially if you're nutritionally deprived of magnesium. For instance, a magnesium level below 1.8 usually means that you're too low on it. Why would you be low on it? Well, if you are prone to drinking alcohol, for instance, in heavy doses, a lot of alcohol can drop your magnesium level, can make you tired, it can give you difficulty with sleep, anxiety, and can cause a lot of different problems. Is magnesium safe to take? Well, the problem with magnesium for some people will be it can give them diarrhea. Magnesium will get the gut going, and it can give people diarrhea. So if it's causing diarrhea, obviously, maybe you want to take it twice a day, take a lower dosage, but a common dosage for magnesium would be about 400 milligrams at bedtime, and many people do use it for sleep. There is a particular genetic profile that we've identified where it can be benefited with the use of magnesium, and it's called a catechol-O-methyltransferase, a COMT, MET-MET genotype. If there's a VAL-MET, and MET-MET genotype, if you have a MET-MET genotype of COMT, which is what we see in about 1/4 of the entire population, those people specifically can maybe do better with magnesium. But we're not at a point where we're going to prescribe magnesium for certain situations. It's something that people can try. You don't want to get too much of it. Usually 400 milligrams 400 milligrams every day is a reasonable amount. And you have another question, is there a better antidepressant medication that doesn't cause stomach or bowel problems? Are all the antidepressant medications prone to causing stomach or bowel problems? Actually not. I mean, a medication like mirtazapine or Remeron is a medication that will actually give an anti-nausea effect for a lot of people. It's often used for sleep in many cases. Mirtazapine or Remeron is a medication we commonly give to people who are as a characteristic of their depression, they're losing weight and they can't eat. We give it to people who are undergoing chemotherapy and they lost their appetite. So mirtazapine or Remeron can be beneficial in relieving nausea for many people, and it actually increases their appetite. The medications that are most problematic for the stomach will be the medications that increase serotonin. Serotonin is in 90% of all the body, serotonin is in the gut. So if you increase serotonin using a so-called serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SNRI like Effexor, Cymbalta, Pristiq, those medications are increasing serotonin as well. And if you increase serotonin, sometimes it can give you some nausea and sometimes diarrhea. So increasing serotonin can often give the gastrointestinal bad effects that people hear. So what do we use alternative? We'll use medications like mirtazapine or Remeron, as I mentioned, and now we're going more to the glutamatergic type of antidepressants, Rexulti being a Abilify. I'm stuck on the antipsychotic medications. Auvelity being a medication we use to affect more of the glutamatergic mechanism of action. I mentioned Abilify, Rexulti, Vraylar. Those kind of medications can be added on to an antidepressant at a lower dosage sometimes to try to decrease any stomach problems people can have. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Mary. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Mary, you had mentioned that your husband broke his leg about 3 weeks ago, and he seemed to be really depressed at that time. Do physical injuries play a role into depression? How does that work? When you have any kind of physical trauma, Mary, you can have an inflammatory effect. Your body responds with inflammation, and in your brain you have these little inflammatory cells called microglia. Microglia, when they get really fired up, you bet, they can cause you to have symptoms of depression, such as low motivation, poor energy, difficulty with concentration, lack of enjoyment with things. Those are all symptoms of an inflammatory type of so-called phenotype, or a symptom characteristics of depression when you have inflammation associated with it. So any kind of trauma that led to inflammation, and breaking your leg can do that, can make you really depressed in some cases. It goes away, but that is a factor. Now another factor is, Mary, when you break your leg and you're physically immobilized and you're just sitting around, that makes you depressed because you're frustrated. You can't do the things you'd like to do. And we all experience that as we age. We're frustrated that we can't do the kind of things we did when we were 16 and 18 and 22. So you get older and you get frustrated by that. But as you get older, you hopefully will gain more wisdom and have understanding that, okay, maybe you can't do the things you did when you were younger, but you have more understanding about the world around you, and you can put your mind to good use that way. And also, as you get older, hopefully you can adapt. When you break your leg, it's a sudden type of thing, and all of a sudden you're immobilized. If you have arthritis, it gradually builds up on you. You try to do the things to try to offset it, but it can be a month-by-month, year-by-year type of thing. With any kind of stress, if you have time to adapt to it, it's a little bit easier to become resilient to it, and that means to putting up with it. So if you have time to adapt to any kind of stress, a lot of times it's easier to cope with that kind of stress. But if it's a sudden stress, a sudden physical injury, that can be more impactful for a person's overall emotional well-being, and sometimes depression can be an after effect of that. Mary, thanks for your call. Unfortunately, I'm out of time for this evening. If you have any questions concerning mental health issues, you may write me via the internet at mattersofthemind@wfwa.org, and I'll see if I can answer your question on the air the next time. I'm Psychiatrist Jay Fawver, and you've been watching Matters of the Mind, now available on YouTube. God willing and PBS willing, I'll be back again next week. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Cameron Psychiatry, providing counseling and care for those that may struggle with emotional and behavioral challenges. More information available at CameronMCH.com.